So good morning. Welcome to the second in our Leadership at Lunchtime series, part of an 8-part series that we'll be addressing special topics in around this leading and trying times for the now remaining 7 weeks. I'm Dr. Mike Grogin. I'm the director of the Executive MBA in Strategic Leadership, and our program is delighted to be hosting this series to bring some moments of reflection to leaders that are undergoing some very difficult times right now. Our topic today is one of servant leadership, and it is quite critical topic in so much that as we look at the way we serve our communities, our workforce, and our ideology, the manner in which we approach that as a leader is quite critical. We're very delighted today to be able to invite Mike Bivens, an alumni of our program, the president of Remco Geotech Contracting, to join us in conversation in and around this topic of servant leadership. So Mike, welcome. Let's make sure your microphone's on and running, and yeah.
Well, thank you for having me, Mike.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like you're at least in a stationary car, so we want to assure everyone that you're being safe. But we appreciate that you've got some time to spend with us, but we know we've got a hard stop at 1 o'clock with you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so basically, let me pull up my slideshow real quick. We're going to talk about servant leadership. And servant leadership itself is an interesting concept, and it goes back quite a long time. In fact, if we were to think about it, it goes back to medieval times when we start thinking about the concept of noblesse oblige, where the royalty owe an obligation to the people of their kingdoms and of their nation states. However, we start seeing it talked about in more specific modern terms when King Frederick the Great of Prussia called himself the first servant of the state. It's followed by the Sandhurst Royal Military Academy put a motto above their gates, and this is where all the United Kingdom Army officers go to learn their trade of serve to lead. And then finally, the idea of servant leadership itself was codified in Robert Greenleaf, a former AT&T executive, a retired AT&T executive, who for years pursued this concept of leadership in the service of something greater than self. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to do very similar to last week's session. We're going to spend about 15 minutes in content. We're going to take another 15 minutes for questions and answers, both directed at Mike Bivens or myself. And then if there are more questions and we have time, we'll go into overtime, but you're welcome to check out at a half-hour point and then come back and watch the recording at a later time. So as we think about this, let me just set the tone. And I'm going to use the words of General Stanley McChrystal, who was the former commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, and then the commander of U.S. forces and the International Security Assistance Forces, Afghanistan. He, in an email to a colleague of his, described servant leadership as a term that describes leaders whose actions, motivations reflect a selfless commitment to a cause, an organization, or teammates. And it's this service to others that's the basis of that. As we go through the talk, as Mike and I answer some questions, please feel free to type questions you would like in the Q&A and send them to Adam or Erica, and then they'll read them to us later just to manage, because we're already starting to get the numbers of participants up. So let's kick off. Mike, let me toss the first question to you as kind of, as a president of a company and, as an experienced leader yourself, what does servant leadership mean to you?
So it's a process that develops leaders who believe that the success of other people around them should be their primary goal in all situations. Servant leader is going to look for ways to help others succeed and thrive in both their personal and their professional lives. It doesn't stop with the borders of work. Continued application on these principles will build a strong organization of empowered leaders who are going to help each other succeed. And that essentially drives the entire team forward as it starts to come together. RIMCO has always been a really good place to work, and we've known that. And as I got towards executive ranks here within the company, the opportunity came up last year to go to school through the strategic leadership program. And I had a few goals when I went there, and it helped me discover what some of these things were. So I wanted to develop my own leadership skills and learn how to do a little bit better myself. At the same time, learn why we were successful. And as we started looking at different topics of leadership, I started to realize that as a company, we've been practicing servant leadership for years, and it was instrumental in making it a great place to work. So that's what it really means to me, is it drives home how we've been successful for so many years. My mentors were always looking for the best way to help everyone else in any situation, and it really plays into this and works well for the organization. As I learned more on this, it became clear to me that that's a really important step in why we were successful.
So part of what I'm hearing is that there's a selfless nature to it. That's the putting the needs of your workforce, putting the needs of your community, putting the needs of your clients and customers before your own personal needs. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. If you can do those things on a regular basis, be consistent about them, and truly believe in your heart that success will come back to you if you help others be successful first, it really works well.
Great. Okay, so let's look at the next question. Is servant leadership isn't actually a style; it's a philosophy. It's an orientation and attitude. So, in your experience, and as you've manifested servant leadership, how do you kind of fit this orientation of selfless dedication to causes other than self? How do you use different leadership styles in and around that?
Well, the key is, regardless of the situation, you want to look for ways where you can help the other party, whoever you're working with at the time, to be successful, and look out for ways that you can help their long-term success. So a few of the different leadership tactics or styles may apply better in different situations, but you could take any of the leadership styles that you can probably talk about a little bit better than I can, Mike, but any of the different leadership styles, as long as you apply them consistently with the concept that it's not about the leader, it's about the other people involved, it makes them more, it makes the leadership styles more effective. So it actually can overlap with traditional leadership styles, and make servant leadership philosophy will make them more effective regardless of the situation.
Yeah, and I think, really what's interesting is that it's the intent of the leader is quite critical here, because I think we could measure leader outcomes. A leader could be exceptionally effective in short or even midterms if they're entirely self-centered, or maybe even have some malfeasance at their heart. They can still get things done and push through. But the distinction is that intent to care for others, the intent to focus on the development of your folks, the care and needs of the community around you, actually has it's a magnifier of those leadership styles that you might approach.
Yes.
So let's think about then the next question that follows on from that is, why now? What is it about the current crisis that in your heart of hearts you believe that servant leadership is absolutely crucial?
Well, in challenging times, it becomes easy for everyone to focus on their own problems and their own gain or loss in a situation. I think when the times get tough for everyone, natural defenses tend to go up, and you start to worry more about what is going to be your outcome of this critical situation. And it's easy to lose focus on the team in this situation. So an emphasis on servant leadership and sort of fueling that philosophy, it's worth talking about right now. I think in these critical times, if you can look at how your followers will look at your behavior during these critical times, it really shows your true culture. And if you can take that into the future and get on the other side of it, you'll come out stronger. It really is a way for you to take every opportunity to help everybody during these times without losing the focus that the team and the company or whatever group of people that you're talking about, be it a team or a church or even a family unit, you know, the overall benefit of the team, everybody's going through it together. Everybody's dealing with the same challenges. And it's very refreshing to work with a team of people that look out for others instead of themselves, even in tough times. The followers are going to remember what the leaders do in these times more than in the easy times. And I think that's really meaningful.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if I'm going to pull from what you've just said as well, you know, in times of crisis, we need folks that are engaged. We need to make certain that there's a unity of purpose. There has to be a very strong foundation of relationship trust. And there has to be this feeling of cohesiveness of community and collaboration in it together. So everything that you've said kind of feeds into those as potential outcomes, and thus suggesting that servant leadership is a very appropriate philosophical approach to take during these times. So as we're kind of nearing the end of our 15-minute promised time of content, I think the more important question for the folks that are kind of, you know, dialing in is, what are some things that they can do to improve their own servant leadership?
Sure. So I think the first step is to realize that servant leadership is not specifically tied to a situation or an event or even limited to business or your organization. Everyone can apply and benefit from using some of these practices. Applying these concepts of serving others before your own personal gain can build your relationships with your friends, with your family, within your church, all of these things. And you have an opportunity to practice some of these skills and really see how they work within your relationships at all parts of your life. So it's not just limited to work. Now that lets you obviously spend more time figuring out how to be a successful servant leader. And I think it'll start to really hit when you see a relationship with a good friend or even a family member improve because of these concepts. It really drives it home, and you realize it also works with your business. Little things make a difference. Get to know your team, get to know your people around you, know their birthdays, talk to them, and actually start to care. If you've not been this way before, give it a chance. I think it really is important. Start to develop a sincere team environment, and then you naturally start to care. So it builds on itself. Never miss a chance to go to a hospital if one of your people are in the hospital. Never miss a chance to go to a funeral if it's been them or their family affected. That's actually sort of driving my strange situation today, but it really is important to care about your team and let them know that you care and you're behind them, and then they'll be behind you. In all these situations, just look for a way to think, if we handle a situation in a certain way, will the outcome produce a better situation for the other party later, right? So it's not necessarily being the easy road in all cases, but figure out what the person needs for their future improvement if you have a chance.
Fantastic. So let me capture some of that as well from some of the writings that Larry Spears, former president and head of the Robert Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, said. He said there are 10 things basically that servant leaders do, and you've touched on a lot of those in your talk so far. I think the first thing that kind of jumps out at me is the true need for empathy, the ability not just to understand what people are going through, but to truly feel it, particularly in times of pain and anxiety and fear. And that empathy is a key and critical servant leader action. The second is one of conceptualization, and that's the ability to kind of envision the future, that you can actually look ahead of the crisis to what the end state looks like. And so when you're going and demonstrating the empathy with folks in either the hospital or funerals or celebrations that you've described, you've got to be able to also articulate a positive vision of the future and be able to see through the current crisis to kind of plant a flag in the future that says, this is where we're going. This is where we're going to be stronger, better when all of this is said and done. I think the third thing that came out of what you said is kind of being the good steward of resources. And you're talking about being a good steward of human resources, of the people entrusted to your care in a leadership role. And I'm not talking paternalistically, but just as the person whose responsibility is to create the environment for them to thrive. And that stewardship is about trust, and it's trust that's placed in you to hold something for for others for a time when they might need it. And so that stewardship is really committed or connected to trust. And then the final thing is that building community, and everything you've talked about is about creating the sense that we're part of a team, we're part of a collective, and that we share hardship together, and that collectively we're going to, and as a community, we're going to get through the crises that are in front of us. So I really appreciate you spending some time with us, Mike. I think it would be great for us to take some questions and to dive into what some of the folks that are watching, some of the issues that they're facing in and around servant leadership and the circumstances they find themselves in. So
I think that's a great idea.
All right. So Erica and Adam have been collecting questions, and so let's go ahead and kick it over to them, and they'll tell us, who the question's for, and hopefully the more questions are for you, since you've got a hard stop, and I've got nothing to do being a faculty member, so I'll hang out a little bit longer and back clean up for you, Mike.
Okay.
Hi, Mike Bivens. I have a question for you. Some people would say that servant leadership is too soft of an approach for many organizations. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the question. I would advise them to try it, give it a shot. I think servant leadership really can work well in a wide range of organizations and applies for many different situations. There's really not a specific reason that you can't look out for the good of others in almost every situation. I mean, definitely it can apply across the board. If a team is really built by servant leadership, you after enough time, you start to get to where you need very few course corrections, and you don't need a harsh leadership. Just a gentle hand on the steering wheel should be sort of a normal approach during the day-to-day operations after you really get a team that's rolling together well. Now, it may take some time to build that, and I think coming from an organization, if there's a leadership change and you haven't had this before, there may be a time lag between you really, when you start applying these concepts until you start to see some serious results. But if this concept of others first and servant leadership is applied consistently, the team ends up self-selecting those of similar values. And you find that in many cases, the team and the culture of the organization will end up chewing up and spitting out the people that really are not able to adopt an others first mentality. Ultimately, if that happens, it ends up making the team stronger. So I think even in a case where you haven't had a team that's been using this before, there's very little downside to it. And once you understand there may be a little bit of time lag, and don't be discouraged. As people buy into this on your team and you start to develop a culture that's really changing for the better, and people see that, I think the movement will spread and build on itself. So I would say try it and be consistent. Don't give up.
Thanks, Mike. This is Adam, and this is another question for you, Mike B. And this seems to relate to the previous question, but what happens when you have an employee that just is not performing as you need and doesn't seem to care?
Sure. Well, thanks, Adam. I think that's that's a really good situation, and probably a very common one for many people on the call. Over the years, you start to see that you really wish you could help a lot of people get better, and they may not really realize that they can. And I think really the servant leader is going to try to find a solution for these situations that will benefit that employee's future. Start to look for solutions that may elevate their talent, build their skill base, allow them to become better in the future. In many cases, the don't care attitude or the lack of performance combined with a don't care attitude, it might be generated just because they don't understand that they really can become a better part of the team that's a higher level contributor. And I think knowing that they have your support behind them and that you'll do anything you can to help them do better is about the highest level that you can take it to support them. And I think at some cases you might find that after you apply that for a while that it's just still not working out, but there's some underlying issue. Maybe you would be better off for that employee to find them a place in a different part of your organization that they fit really well and they can thrive. So looking for other opportunities is always there. Definitely never off the table, I guess, but I usually would try to start off with improvement first. And finally, if it came down to an idea that after all options are exhausted, they're still just not fitting on the team, I think at that point you still need to keep the concepts of servant leadership active and do everything you can at that point to still try and help them find successful employment elsewhere. Don't let up on the gas on it, and be consistent all the way through every stage of that. And I believe it will build up that team member as well as many others around them.
Great, thanks, Mike. So my next question is directed to Mike Grogine. It seems that servant leadership and trust are quite interconnected. How should we think about these two things?
Yeah, thanks. I think that, Mike has answered part of that question earlier as well. Trust is an outcome of servant leadership. If we serve others, if we care for others, if we establish an intent that we are selfless in our pursuit of leadership, it's not about our own personal agenda or profit. We generate trust because trust is built upon the perception of intention. And so if we think about it, we measure the outcome of servant leadership by trust itself. It's also important that trust is the foundation and the bedrock of getting folks committed to, again, shared purpose and outcome and the community in which they work within each other. Think about, all of us have experiences in the past where we've worked with people we just did not trust. We didn't give it our all. We were guarded in our conversations. We didn't share as much if we did not have faith in their good intentions. And so that trust is a vital part of any and all collaborative activity in organization. I also think that the more trust we have in a leader, the easier it is for that leader to serve others as well. So, so there's this kind of reciprocal relationship between trust and servant leadership. But at the end of the day, I think that's the metric by which we measure if someone's been effective as a servant leader.
Mike, I've got another question, and this is kind of open for both. If you have a large team with several different team members, full-time, part-time, and even maybe a PRN basis, how does one apply the concept of servant leadership? And should we wait for the full team to be recruited?
I'll toss that to
Mike,
you.
I'll jump in on the front end of that. I'll start with the back end of the question. I don't think you should wait until the full team's recruited to start this. I think the servant leadership begins during the recruitment phase. So understanding that you have these concepts available to you at all times, and from the very first person that you're interacting with, I believe it will help to build your relationships. I would say the first thing is don't wait. The second thing is if you have the opportunity to begin this as you're building your team, the team members get to see that you're genuinely and you're genuine and sincere about it as your team starts to build. So I think it builds a consistent theme throughout the development of the organization. I really believe the key idea there is that the members get to see the consistency.
Yeah, and yeah, let me follow on with that. So remember that servant leadership is not a style of leadership. It is a philosophy. And so it should be part of your character, and it's your day-to-day operation, whether you're leading 1 people or 1,000, whether they're full-time or part-time, or contractors or vendors. It is the manner in which you treat others and engage in them and care about their development, their well-being, their success. And so it's an attitude and it's an element of character. And if you treat folks with dignity and respect, even if they're in the wrong role, like Mike talked about earlier, we might have to put them into a different position to take better advantage of their skills. That treatment sends a message through the organization that your people are important. They're important to the leader, and they should be important to each other. And so I would say that, at the end of the day, just put that as part of your philosophical, your attitudinal approach to how you treat others in an institution. Now, one of the interesting things is you can absolutely care about folks, but because of personality characteristics, or you may be a quiet person of a few words, it may not come across as strongly. So make certain that you, at least in a way that's consistent with your own, personal style, let folks know that they're important to you. Let folks know that they're important to the mission. Let folks know that they're important to the organization and the principles on which you're founded. So again, I say it's part of your character. It's how you approach everything, and you walk the talk in taking care of your folks.
Great, Mike. I have another question that's open to both of you. How do you keep the team together when this crisis is actually requiring us to be physically apart?
Mike, I'll jump in on the front end of that because I've got a couple of minutes left, if you don't care, and then you might follow on after if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I think we're struggling with that a little bit, but it is amazing to me how well the team is starting to realize that the distancing we're doing right now is related to this concept, because every one of us that's working from home or in a different position, different location, we're doing this for the greater good of our coworkers, our families, and our friends, and ultimately the entire nation. And I think if you truly have this concept of servant leadership in the culture of the organization, it becomes it becomes naturally easier to keep your team together, because the intention of the distancing becomes more clear. Now, when that hits on an individual level, the individuals become more accommodating and start to develop new methods of communication that they've never used before. And a lot of that stuff will happen on its own instead of having to push it down to them and take them solutions. Once the team realizes what they're doing is for the greater good, they'll start to develop their own solutions.
So Mike, I'm quite sensitive that you have something solemn that you have to go join right now. And I want to thank you for attending. I want to remind everyone that it's Mike Bivens, who is a graduate of our program, but also he's the president, and more importantly, he's the president of Remco Geotechnical Contractors, and he serves on our advisory board for the Executive MBA Strategic Leadership to help guide us in our interactions with the community. Thanks again so much for your time, Mike. I know that it was really hard to kind of slice this into a very, very high operational tempo.
Oh, no problem at all. Thank you guys for the opportunity. And Mike, I'm looking forward to following up with a recording to hear some of the other stuff that you take on after this.
All right. Thanks, Mike. So
thank you.
Erica, let me go ahead and add on to Mike's answer. What's quite interesting is the need now for engagement, the need now for connectivity between folks is even greater because we are geographically dispersed. We have to be more intentional in our outreach. We have to be more intentional in our communications. It cannot be as easy as we do it when we pass people in the hallway. So I think that now more than ever, we have to demonstrate the care and attention to the needs of others as we're geographically dispersed. So that's a half hour of our session. I will stay here with the team for as long as we have questions coming in. I'm hoping that only takes another half hour because all of us probably have to get back on work as well. So thank you. If you're clicking off, come back and watch the recording. We hope to see you again next week. So Eric and Adam, what other questions do we have to direct in?
Yeah, Mike, I have got another one. So where do you see servant leadership applying in fair compensation across gender lines? So for example, females earning significantly less than their male counterparts despite having more experience and more education.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not certain that that's just as applied to servant leadership. It's about equity and justice. If we set up conditions of inequity in our organizations, where people lose faith and trust in the procedural fairness of what we have, what we do is we set up conditions where people aren't going to be as engaged and they're not going to be as forthcoming. In a servant leadership mentality, we want to make certain that we're not just caring for others before self, but that we're paying attention to the balance and the fairness of our actions. And if we have institutional unfairness built into our systems, we as servant leaders should be addressing that.
Great, Mike. Okay, so I have one more question on my end. What are some practical things you are doing now to apply servant leadership during this time of social distancing?
Yeah, so I think in addition to the four things that kind of ended our formal portion of the talk with, the maintaining empathy of understanding how others are feeling and moreover feeling how they're feeling, painting a picture of the future where we have come through this successfully, being good stewards of our resources and taking care of the things that have been entrusted to us, and then building community. I think that we should be we should be vigorously developing our leadership during this time. If you think about it, this is a crucible. And the hardest steel has to be heated up quite a bit to give it the temper that it needs. How we act and behave as leaders right now sets the tone and conditions for how our folks will lead in the future when times aren't nearly so turbulent. Mike said that during his talk, and I wanted to gravitate towards that. We have to set an example of taking care of each other, but more importantly, leading in a way that's appropriate and that reflects strong character and values for the organization. In our last session, I alluded to that a leader as a standard bearer sets the values and establishes what's important for us to believe, which is one of the key underpinnings of our organizational culture. So right now, during this time, I think we should be vigorously developing the leaders underneath us. And I realize that you have no extra time on your plate. So as senior leaders, we've got to find ways of encouraging our junior leaders to act in a way that's consistent with the values of the organization.
Thank you, Mike. I have got one more on my end as well. Is there any way to help a leader begin to embody these characteristics? If your leadership does not follow these practices, how can you help them manage, or how can you help manage up to promote them?
Say that again. I just got a little bit confused.
Yes. Is there a way to help a leader begin to embody these characteristics? If your leadership does not follow these practices, how can you help manage up to promote them?
Okay, yeah, so I think the question is that what happens when we have leaders above us that aren't leading in a way that best exemplifies the servant leadership model? Is that what you take from it, Adam?
Correct.
Okay. In honesty, there are only a couple tools that we have in our toolkit to lead up. You know, we think about all of the the influence capabilities we have as leaders when we lead down, leading up is far more reduced. So the first and foremost is we have to build strong relationships with the folks above us in an organization. If we don't have a strong relationship with leadership above us, we won't have a voice in their ear. And so by gaining their trust, by becoming influential to them as a confidant or as an advisor, then we can actually slowly move their leadership philosophy. Now remember, styles will change with the circumstance, but their philosophy that caring for others actually is a beneficial thing to do in the organization. And so that's the first. The second is one of rational persuasion. We can make the business case that taking care of your people, putting their needs before your own, actually has a far greater return on the investment of time and activity for a leader than if they take care of themselves first. And so Robert Greenleaf, who is the, Robert Goodnight, who is the CEO, Jim Goodnight, geez. Jim Goodnight, CEO of the SAS Institute. So it's they do software and business analytics. Was interviewed once, and he said, "Look, I take care of my people. They take care of the customers take care of me, and that's the way it is." And then they said, "Well, don't you see that giving all these benefits might seem to be kind of, you know, over the top?" And he says, "What's wrong with taking care of your people?" And I think that we've got to build that mentality up in the organization. It has better financial payoff for us in the mid to long run. It may not have a short-term payoff, but there's a rational element for it beyond just the values-based one. So yeah, if there are any other questions, send them to Adam and to Erica, yeah, we'll give it a minute or two to see if anybody has any burning final questions. Adam and Erica, you can tell me when I'm done.
I think the questions have wrapped up on my end. Thank you so much for everybody that submitted a really good lens and perspective on this.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you all. Harder times are ahead. We know this. We're going to have to make very difficult decisions as leaders in our organizations. Do it with compassion, treat people with dignity and respect. And even if you have to make some of the hardest decisions, such as you know, reduction in workforce, furloughs, and things that impact your folks, remember that how you do that will set the tone for how they come back to you, and also set the tone for everyone in your organization. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12:30, where we're going to talk about how do you manage work-life balance when the lines are no longer clear between those two. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope that you have a good week between now and then. Thank you all very much.